is a very dangerous sequence, and I think it is important for the new American administration to understand the root causes of this war. It's not about Ukraine's NATO aspirations, because 3 years ago, when the full-scale invasion started, Ukraine had very little chance of becoming a NATO member. So most of us, I think, understand that it's about Russia's imperialistic ambitions, and this should be at the heart of the understanding of this negotiation.
Doing anything he wants. Well, let's get the Ukrainian perspective on all of this. I've been speaking to Olena Prokopenko, a senior fellow at the German Marshall Fund. She's a former advisor to the Ukrainian government. And she told me how concerned she was that her president, Zelensky, is not involved in those talks starting tomorrow in Riyadh.
I'm very concerned about this. I think it's completely unacceptable to conduct any negotiations without Ukraine at the table. The negotiation positions should first be agreed between Ukraine, Europe, and the US, and then President Trump should put pressure on the Russian President Putin to follow through with that deal. I think as of this moment, we see a completely reversed sequence. We see President Trump and his administration deciding on the conditions of the deal, at least preliminarily, with the Russian side, and then bringing the key messages agreed to Ukraine. I think this is a very dangerous sequence, and I think it is important for the new American administration to understand the root causes of this war. It's not about Ukraine's NATO aspirations, because 3 years ago, when the full-scale invasion started, Ukraine had very little chance of becoming a NATO member. So most of us, I think, understand that it's about Russia's imperialistic ambitions, and this should be at the heart of the understanding of these negotiations.
And how concerned are you then, Olena, that even before the talks began, we had J.D. Vance, the vice president, saying that Ukraine was going to have to give up territory?
I think the only hope that I see right now is, first of all, in the fact that this Munich Security Conference that just took place over the past weekend was a wake-up call for Europe. I think the hope is in Europe's growing sense of urgency, that it has to waste no more time. It has to act fast, just as the U.S. administration acts very fast and often very chaotic. But Europe has to step up, and I think hope also comes from the fact that the U.S. administration is not very clear what it wants to do, and I think we still have a window of opportunity to steer the narratives in the right direction. I think we have all observed how the narrative of the U.S. side was changing from before the meeting with President Zelensky, that Vice President Vance had, and then after the meeting. Before the meeting, basically the narrative was shifting towards Russia and the U.S. deciding what's going to happen, and then Ukraine and Europe implementing that. But then after the meeting, we saw that Vice President Vance didn't rule out the possibility of the Western troops on the ground. He didn't rule out the possibility of arming Ukraine further. So I think there's still time, there's still an opportunity to influence the narrative. And that's why I think Europe should no longer take security for granted, and it should unite very fast. And what Prime Minister Starmer said today, going into this emergency meeting that President Macron was hosting this afternoon in Paris, is that there must be a U.S. backdrop for lasting peace in Ukraine. And what I understand he means is that Europe and the U.S. have to do it together. They cannot broker any peace in Ukraine without Ukraine, but also without each other.
And Sir Keir Starmer has said, yes, that there has to be some form of US backstop to any peace deal. But isn't the problem that at the moment it doesn't sound as though the Americans are prepared to do that? Certainly J.D. Vance said there'd be no US troops on the ground, and that the US was no longer be prepared to be the guarantor of security in Europe.
Again, I think the U.S. administration, the U.S. administration only respects strength and power. And if Europe proves itself to be a strong partner, if it proves that it's able to act fast and to mobilize itself, to agree on the conditions of financing the defense industry, on deciding on the issues of interoperability, if it puts aside some of the national interests, even because we are at the juncture in history that there is no luxury to think about the national interests in such detail as we used to. So I think if those conditions are met, there's still a possibility to present itself as an equal partner to the US, Europe. And I think it's still possible to act together and to put pressure on Russia together as a united front, US, Europe, and Ukraine.
Do you think the people of Ukraine are now prepared to sacrifice territory in order to bring this war to an end, even if that meant perhaps for the time being freezing the front lines where they are now, with Russia controlling significant chunks of what was Ukrainian territory?
I think we need to remember that Ukrainian people pay the highest price for their freedom, and nobody wants peace more than Ukrainian people do. But at the same time, we also understand, Ukraine understands that we don't want peace at any cost. It has to come with security guarantees. I think by now, the Ukrainian society has come to understanding that as much as it wants to have a peaceful future, to stop losing their loved ones, to stop being shelled and bombed and terrorized into submission every day, which Russia is doing, and it doesn't want peace. It wants to terrorize Ukraine into capitulation. As much as this is all the case, Ukrainian people also understand that security guarantees have to be the backdrop of any deal. Otherwise, it's going to be a mere break in the war, and then Russia will regroup. It will have sanctions lifted. It will come stronger, and it will invade again, but not just Ukraine. I believe at this point, even some of the most skeptical members of the EU are more or less clear on the fact that Russia will not stop at Ukraine. So all of this has to be taken into account, and no peace can be reached without robust security guarantees. And the first and foremost, the most important security guarantee is, of course, NATO membership. And I'm very hopeful about if it's possible to be hopeful about, that's based on the outcomes of the security conference this weekend, but the fact that NATO membership for Ukraine is not off the table, I think is very, very encouraging.
Olena Prokopenko, Senior Fellow at the German Marshall Fund and a former Ukrainian government advisor, speaking to me just a little earlier on Times Radio.